Grant. Well, we're here for an All Things Memoir, timely topic. And so I want to open by asking you if you have ever read a memoir where you thought to yourself, this just doesn't seem true, like too fantastical or too unbelievable.
I feel like I've heard of these memoirs, like on, I don't know, racy talk shows, but I haven't actually read one. I racked my brain about this question, and the main story I came up with is kind of memoir adjacent. It had to do with all of the accusations that were in the news in the early 90s about satanic ritual abuse in preschool in the 90s. And it later came to be known as the Satanic Panic. And hundreds of preschool teachers were accused, and I definitely had a hard time believing all of those accusations because they relied on children's recovered memory, which was highly manipulated. And the accusations were, but they were so widespread, and they were also sustained by journalists and court cases, only to be disproven later, which to me shows you that the truth can be very slippery at times. And we all get caught up into a type of groupthink when we hear about something. And I was thinking of you because I know you have probably more examples of this because you've worked on at least one book where you discovered the author wasn't telling the truth. And I think because you've worked on memoir for so long as an editor, I'm just imagining you've come across a lot of proposals that just didn't pass the sniff test. And that's what we're exploring today on All Things Memoir. We want to talk about truth or untruth in memoir. And we're talking about this very specifically because of Jason Arday, who I'm assuming most people have heard about by now, and the publication of his memoir just this last week on Tuesday, August 11th, and then his death, unfortunately, by suicide on Friday, August 14th. And it's quite a dramatic story. So can you fill us in on it, Brooke, for those who haven't heard it?
It is a dramatic story, and it came across my awareness. I knew he was publishing, actually, Grant. I wanted to reach out to him to have him be a guest on Memoir Nation. And I do this thing where I'll take a screenshot of somebody and I'm like, okay, come back to him. And his book is called Great and Unfortunate Things. It came out in Simon Schuster on Tuesday. Like you said, there was a swirl of controversy around him because he's been accused of plagiarizing his dissertation, his PhD dissertation from Cambridge. And then he also went on to become a professor there, youngest professor ever at Cambridge. And he had been accused of not only plagiarizing his dissertation, but also countless publications after that. And then he's happened to have a book deal with Simon & Schuster, of course. And then this was kind of igniting a new firestorm of accusations against him. And so the public discourse around this guy, Jason Arday, has been really intense for a really long time. I just was catching wind of it because of the memoir. I wasn't aware of all of the academic stuff that had come to pass prior. But of course, now that we're doing this episode on All Things Memoir, I have caught up on it, and it is pretty bad. I mean, what he is accused of doing, of course, which is plagiarizing and making up details and being incredibly fantastical in his memoir, is hugely problematic. But I will also say that the way he was handled and how strong the reactions have been around him, and like I said, the firestorm of media has invariably would send anyone into a tailspin and into, perhaps this tragic outcome. And that's the gist of the story. So we're going to get into it a little bit.
Yeah, and then one of his accusers, or his primary accuser on the academic front, was this pretty racist guy, right? Like he had actually lost his job because of that. And then I've read also just about the issue of the difference between how professors of color have been treated with these in the same circumstances and white professors.
Well, on that topic, Grant, let's just say out loud that Jason Arday was Black. And there's a great Atlantic piece by Tyler Austin Harper who goes into a lot of detail. And if I could just read this little piece from him, it says, Arday was fetishized in his ascendancy by white liberals for whom he served as a mirror in which they could see their own goodness. And he was fetishized in his downfall by white conservatives who saw him as a test case for their own obsessions with an academic apparatus that they believe is not meritocratic enough, which is to say, not white enough. And so I appreciate you bringing that up, and just wanted to say that up front because anyone who's not following the story and doesn't really know the ins and outs, he was really celebrated and it seems by all accounts to be a pretty charming and charismatic guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this has many tentacles that we're going to learn about in the coming days and weeks and years. I actually started to wonder, this is a different kind of angle on this, but It just seems like there's a memoir scandal every week. This is like the year for memoir scandals, or that's what I started thinking. I'm like, is it just because I'm now writing a memoir that I pay attention to this
It's in
more?
your awareness.
It's been really interesting, though, just because they've taken on so many different flavors. And I actually did a little Wikipedia search just to see, are there more now? Have there, did these exist? Turns out memoir scandals go back to essentially the beginning of time. They probably do. Not documented, but I saw a big list on Wikipedia. I saw such people as boyhood hero Davy Crockett, Carlos Castaneda on the list. But I was looking actually for Marco Polo because he was accused of fabricating his memoirs back in the late 1200s. And actually someone else supposedly wrote the book for him, a ghostwriter way back in the day named Rustichello da Pisa. And he shaped, Marco Polo's account of his travels through Asia and his years at the court of Kublai Khan. And the result was this famous book, The Travels of Marco Polo. So anyway, it just got me to think that people are naturally, maybe not naturally, but often great embellishers of their lives. And the line between lying and embellishment gets to be pretty thin, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really interesting point about motivation, and then maybe we could go on to like, why is it so much worse right now? But I was exploring this in my Substack over the weekend around what people's motivations would be to lie. And of course, publishing deals are a big motivation for certain people at a certain level. I imagine that he was celebrated, like the youngest professor at Cambridge, and he's getting all these speaking gigs and doing all this stuff. And then the cracks started to emerge, but already he had a book deal. And it's very difficult, I imagine, to unravel what's already been done. And like you're out there and you're putting yourself out there. But I also speculated, Grant, a little bit around the extent to which people believe their own lies. Like if you create a mythology for yourself, and then that is sort of who you become in the world, and it becomes your story. And of course, we don't know him, and all we can do is speculate. But when we start to talk about lying, it gets into some pretty psychologically complex stuff.
Definitely. I was thinking as you were talking about this, Mary Carr has an answer for everything memoir, right? Is that the title of her next memoir or Art of Memoir?
Right?
Should be, yeah.
Anyway,
she wrote The Art of Memoir, and she says, truth may have become a foggy, fuzzy nether area, but untruth is simple, making up events with the intention to deceive. But I think, as you said it, is that people might start out with the intention to deceive, and then they might start believing their own deceptions.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that makes the most sense to me, honestly. I mean, I don't think that's everybody's motivations, but I feel like he could be a person who believed his own lies. That said, some of them were just so egregious. Like there was the example that he ran, 6 marathons in 6 days, this super endurance athlete, that he didn't speak until he was 11 years old, that he couldn't read or write until he was 18 years old, but then somehow became this academic at Cambridge. So there's just so many ins and outs to this story. And I feel a lot of empathy for him. I mean, I did even before the announcement of his death. I saw this pylon and was like, oh my gosh, this is so messy. It also speaks to another whole element of this story, Grant, of course, which is like our online culture, that everybody has a microphone or a megaphone. And that guy you mentioned who outed him and who basically did like a very long Substack about all of his egregious errors or plagiarisms, it did have the tenor of a witch hunt. Effort and time that he put into that to, basically excoriate him felt very intense to me. And so you can start to feel like people are coming with their pitchforks and you better watch out. And I imagine that Jason himself felt very scared, and obviously it ended in such a tragedy, but the entire thing maybe shows some of the worst of all human behavior from all sides.
Yeah, I was going to say that Atlanta quote you read really summed it up. It's on both sides of the issue. It's revealing people and their biases and sometimes their attack instincts. And just before we got on, we were talking about, I said, this actually makes me want to read the memoir even more and to find out more. And you took a little bit of an opposing view. So I'm just kind of curious, what kind of legacy would a book like this have? Or could it have?
Exactly. And obviously we don't know. It'll be interesting to see. And we can in fact track it because I have BookScan and we can look at the sales and see, is this the kind of thing that will actually spike sales because more people want to read it? I think that it won't be the case. I actually think people are going to have a lot of interest in the story, but not the book. I'm willing to be proven wrong, of course. It does remind me a lot of James Fry's scandal. He wrote A Million Little Pieces. It's been 20 years since that happened. A Million Little Pieces, of course, was out for a very long time before James Fry had this enormous reckoning with Oprah, and where it was outed that he lied about so many things. I had read it before that even happened. And so he got a chance to have his book read by many people. But then in the 20 years since, he's been a pariah. And he then came out with a novel just this year, if I'm remembering correctly. It could have been 2025. And it did not get good coverage. I mean, I think he was just routinely rejected by anybody who wanted to do media. And that is a different kind of legacy. I mean, James Fry gratefully is alive and he's here and he didn't take his own life. But I think that whole experience, of course, ruined his career. And in Jason Arday's case, it's worse than that.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can follow up in 6 months or a year, kind of see where we are with this, see if it's worth talking to his editor or a family member. And maybe there'll be even a memoir following this one, telling a different story. But maybe there'll be a whole series of them. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. We hope your summer writing or your summer daydreaming is going well. I need both. Anyway, we hope you'll return this September and ready for some of our couple of our big programs we've been planning. To start, we're offering an 8-week intensive class to get you ready to publish your memoir, from the proposal to the pitch to the query letter to actually submitting and everything in between. I think we've got like a couple spots left, so sign up right away. And we're going to host a Pitchapalooza event with the book doctors. That's a part of this. And that is free and open to an entire community. So please go on into our community and RSVP for that. And we're going to start getting ready for our second annual JanYourStory, a challenge to write 500 words of your memoir in January. So rest up, take a swim, enjoy the summer heat, and come back ready to write your story.
Ciao, everybody.